All right, so we're going to talk about forms today. So let's start. Oh, that goes too fast. The things that we're going to talk about are here. Oh, well, this is just a little bit of an introduction to it. Oh, yeah, it's very nice. It's a dynamic page. That is that we are interacting with the user. User's inputting and we're reacting. Our website is reacting to that. Now, if you're going to have dynamic web, so that's going to require you to have something happening either server side or client side. We can do both of those with our forms. So with your form, you can have some JavaScript. We're not going to talk about that today. When I look through the notes that we've got, there's nothing in JavaScript in this lesson. But obviously, we'll have to look at JavaScript later in the course. The other thing that you can use with your forms, which is really more common, I suppose, is use PHP. And so the difference there is PHP actually only works on the server. And so the form that you'll see in the example we'll do today actually does use PHP on the server, but that means that we have to have access to the server. Generally speaking, when you're sort of coding on your laptop or whatever at home, unless you've installed the server on your laptop, you would have to get some kind of access to somebody else's server. Well, that's okay for us here. We actually have a server here. Robert Ford set it up in his office. And so you'll see that the example that we use today does actually access that server that we got here. So it uses PHP, but we're not doing any PHP programming. And because the actual code that is working that PHP file is on the server, we won't be looking at. So bear in mind that there is some PHP there. Have you guys come across PHP at all? No. Didn't do any in 1436. So that's something to look forward to, right? I don't think we're going to do PHP at all in this school, maybe.
I hope not.
How can we do web development without PHP? I mean, but we will do a bit of JavaScript. Okay, so that's our two things that make it dynamic. We use JavaScript on the client end, use PHP on the server end. On the server end, you can also use some other languages. You could use Python.
Are we going to start from scratch in JavaScript?
Why, did you do some other JavaScript in a previous class?
No, I want to start from scratch because I haven't done
I believe we are going to start from scratch, but it won't be this lesson. There's no JavaScript in this lesson. Okay, so we're able to get through our forms without using JavaScript. I expect it's coming up pretty soon, though. All right, pretty soon. So
maybe next week.
Well, yeah, maybe. Okay, so this actually is a representation of the example form that is part of this lecture. And I will ask you to create this. Now, you'll see I gave a link to a startup set of files. I won't say startup file, it's a startup compressed folder. So that contains a HTML file, CSS file, a bunch of CSS files actually. It contains everything to create this website except the HTML code for the form and also some CSS that you'll need to do to style the form. So these are the form that you're going to have. It's got two different areas with fields that are separated and sort of put into columns beside each other, in which we will capture some data from the user. Now, the data is going to be captured in different types of data. So you'll see this in a minute that we actually are able to specify the type of data that we want to capture from the user. So we can have text data that would be here. So that would go into a text input field. We can, and these are all text input, we can specify that the entry must be email, in which case, so there's a cool thing. There's built in, and we'll see this kind of like the last slide of this lecture, talks about how we can validate the data. There's built-in validation into the HTML for a form. So if we specify an email field, it will not accept an entry which isn't in an email format. So in other words, has an @ sign in, because all emails got @ Right, so likewise, we can specify numbers, and the numbers, that comes in a nice way because it's it comes in this spinner, they call it a spinner, but basically you can go up and down if you're using numbers. Checkboxes, radio buttons, maybe you've seen those before, I don't know, I want to move this. Does that move it? Yeah, it does. Let's move that there. So there's no radio button on that, maybe on the next one. Yeah, so other types of fields that we will use in this one, you can have a date field, which works with a widget, which has a calendar on it, and you can select. Just when you click on that, it'll open up that widget for you. Not sure what that, oh, selection list. Selection list, you can create a bunch of choices, and then when you click on it, you'll see a big list drop down and you pick the one you want. And actually you can pick more than one if you want. You can use your control key or your shift key to select more than one. The radio button, which I just mentioned. So we have radio buttons and checkboxes that we can use. With a radio button, how it differs from a checkbox is it's sort of, you can only have one out of the selection of radio buttons that are given to you, whereas checkboxes, you could choose them all if you wanted. Then we have these buttons that we can create. There's a sort of an inbuilt button, which is a submit type submit, or you can use type button. If we use type button, it's going to reset whatever's there. So we've got an actual button here. This is probably a submit. Yes, it says it's a submit. One page at a time, please. All right, so I just sort of went over that kind of quickly. I do like to go over things quickly because I don't like people to go to sleep while I'm talking. But you might anyways. As mentioned there, we have this concept of controls and widgets. The controls are those entry spaces that we saw there. Okay, so the types of fields that we can use, we're going to refer to those as controls. The widgets, for example, the date widget, when we click on it, we get a calendar come up. Sorry? In where? Yeah, sorry. Yeah, probably the same as some control somewhere else. Yeah. The checkboxes, all of those we sort of mentioned. And when you do this exercise, so the idea is that the example is given you here. When you do the exercise, you get to see all of these as well. So let's have a look. Yeah, the calendar, the color picker. Okay, you can select, you can have an input type of color, in which case then you can use the hash symbol in inverted commas and a yeah, hexadecimal number reference. Files, oh, you can use a file, you can set a type to file, which will allow you to sort of upload files to let the user upload files to your thing. So I was talking to you about the start of the lesson, about the idea of client side and server side. If you're going to have a web page that's going to be on the internet, it's going to involve some server, isn't it? Because you're going to have to actually go through a router onto the web. So you'll have some server that you will publish your website to. But during development, a lot of people just put their websites on their laptop while they're working, right? So when the user fills out the form, that data has to go somewhere. So we will use the server and some programming on the server to accept that data. Actually, the server will validate the data when it arrives. PHP is involved in that. And the thing about the PHP, it can also work with SQL. So we can embed SQL into our PHP code, and therefore we can take that data, which we have got from the user in the form, we put that straight into a SQL table or set of tables, and so that we can use it forever. I guess then it's saved, right? Because it will be recorded to some kind of secondary memory. And that's basically kind of how a lot of the internet works, right? There's a lot of things that it's storing information and pulling back information. Must be that way to work in a commercial sense. Okay, and that's why it's talking about a purchase order there. All right, so everything that's going to happen in HTML to make the form work, we start with some form tags. We put the form in there. We're going to put a bunch of input fields into a form. And here's the reference to the, can I highlight that? No. Okay. Here's the reference to PHP that I mentioned. If you look at the name of this file, processform.php. So what's happening is that on our server, this is the machine that's sitting in Robert Ford's office. And so this is this is the URL for that server. There is sitting in on the root there is a file called processform.php, which has been created and uploaded onto the server. And when we run this form, when we press the submit button, what will happen is that all of the data that we have will be sent to that file, which will process it and do whatever it does with it. So that's so the P. Now, when we have an action in the form, we have to specify what method we're going to use. There's two methods we could use. We could use a get or we could use a post. There is a benefit in either, I suppose. The problem with using the get is that all of the information that came from the form will be appended into the where the URL is at the top of the screen. So that's kind of bad for security. So we typically use the post if we're going to have a serious website. All right, so about these fields. So when you have an input, you need to specify what type of field you're going to have. So here we are there. We need to specify the name of the input. The name of the input will go with it as when we post or get the data to where we're sending it to. So that's very important. And the ID, we can use that if we want to style it or whatever else we want to do with it. So if you wanted to, well, yeah, as for styling for CSS, or if you wanted to manipulate it with JavaScript, because the JavaScript uses selectors just the same as our CSS does. So you know what I mean when I'm talking about selectors, right? Any element we can use a selector to work CSS on it, but we can also use that to work JavaScript. Okay, so here is a list, a table of many different types that we can use in a form. So the first one being text. Password, it's just like text, but it will be displayed on the form as just asterisks, right? So you won't be, so if somebody's looking over your shoulder, they won't be able to see what you're typing. That's all that is. Email, well, it's going to require an @ symbol. Okay, so that's going to be a telephone number. All right, so there is a way there of storing telephone numbers. You'll see if you use that as a type for your input, that any telephone numbers that you've used previously, they might auto come up for you. Number, that's going to use a slider. Okay, so number is going to, you're going to be able to just click up and down to choose between numbers. You can also set a range for the number. So you can set it, a minimum and a maximum. So you can constrain people to use only between the numbers 1 and 10 or something like that. So that's a nice nifty thing that comes with the number slider. The date I mentioned, that's going to come with a widget, which allows you to see a calendar, and you just pick a date from that. Radio buttons, either or type of thing. Now, it's not binary. You don't have to just have 2 buttons. You can have more than 2 buttons. But the thing is, if you put a bunch of radios together, only one of them can be selected. And they all will have to have the same name. Checkbox, it's kind of like a radio button, except multiples can be chosen at a time. All right, when are we going to get started with this soon, I suppose? All right. So we've got a submit type, and we only use one of those per form. That's going to submit everything in the form to send it on its way through the action. Reset, okay, so that's going to be a button that's going to clear all of the data out. The button can be used to click an action. We'll often tie a JavaScript to a button. So that can be used as well. Color, okay, so with color, I mentioned this a minute ago. You can use that to select the color or use a color. File, if you wanted the user to upload a file. Hidden from the user, we would use this for some special controls thing. The user's not going to see this one. It's not hidden from us. We can use it for our programming, for our JavaScript, but it won't be used it won't be seen by the user. Range slider, users can select from a range. It's kind of like number. Okay. All right, so here's a little bit of code showing a couple of examples, 2 examples inside a form where we're using, so let's just look at each part of this. Label, okay, so outside of this, what we can't see is going to be the form tags, right? And then so this is inside a form. The label tag, what that does is it's going to put a label beside the input box. You'll have an input box beside it. We see that this input box is going to be text. The for means that this label is attached to or associated with the input, which is called street. The input that's got the name of street, that's this one. And so this label, when the user touches that label, clicks on that label, they will be put to the input in that input box. So that's going to be, they're associated together. Here's another way of doing it. Inside the label tag, so there's 2 different ways here. Inside the label tag, we actually have the input is inside the label tag. Will work the same way. So that the user is going to be, when they go to that label, they end up going to the input box. I don't know which one of those you like to do. There's 2 different ways of doing the same thing, really. All right, so what do we got here? You can associate. So here, what they've done is everything here is kind of similar to what we did in the previous one. But what they've done is they've added another attribute, and they've given it another attribute called value, and they've given it a value for value. Yeah. Okay, so what's going to happen then is that input box is actually going to be filled with this value. Now, if the user just accepts that, that's what will go, be passed on to the PHP, to go on to the other, to whatever processing. So that's kind of a default value that they can either accept or not. And the reason why I'm mentioning this is because we have another thing which is called a placeholder, which is different than this. So placeholder and value are 2 different things. Value comes up, you'll see the text is dark or bold. It's not bold, but it's like real value. And so that actually is a value that's set for that at the moment. And if you process the form, then that value will be taken, as opposed to placeholder, which is different. So this is the placeholder. I hope I'm on the, yeah. So that was the default value. The placeholder is different. And when it shows up as light gray to indicate. So you're just going to put some comment in there for somebody to do something. If they don't do anything, then that field is empty. Does that make sense? So there's nothing in there. It's just some kind of instructions that you want to use. So instead of saying value here, they just said placeholder and some instruction for the user. Comes up as light gray. And if they don't put anything in there when you submit, that field is treated as if it was empty. All right, what do we got? Number boxes, spinners. We talked about that a minute ago. Check. Oh, sorry. Yeah, placeholders. Yep. There, number boxes. So we talked about that a minute ago. So here it is a little bit more. We've set this to type number. Okay, and we're actually doing steps. I didn't mention that before, but let's mention it here. We could change this to another number. Supposing you put steps 5 or step 2, then when you did the up or down, then it would increment by that number, right? So if you had a 5 here, then the next number would be 5 more. All right, so you, in this one, we actually have a minimum and a maximum. So our number is constrained to that range. We won't have any number smaller than 0 and no number larger than 5. Still going to sleep. So why is that? Is it because it's old news, or I'm not talking too slow, I don't think. Am I?
Good pace.
Is it good pace?
Yes.
All right, so what do we got here? We got type radio. Notice that for type radio, they all have the same name. Okay, we got many name radios here. We got two. They all have the same name. All right, but though they do have different labels. So the label for M is male, label for F is female, and we've set this ID to M and F, right? Okay, so but the name is the same.
The value,
Sorry,
the value.
the value is different. Okay, and oh, notice this in this one here. Yeah, the value is M, the value is F, but in this one here, so this value is what's going to be passed on by the PHP to wherever's doing the processing. That value will be passed on. But look at this one. This one is checked. That means that we've set that when when it renders the page, when the browser renders the page, this one will come up with M. I guess you'd do that if like you're in a situation where most of the people were men. Yeah, anyways. So that's that one.
Again, the type radio.
Yeah, type radio.
What does it do?
There it is, type radio. Radio gives you can have a bunch of radio buttons, but only one of them will be selected. The value of that one will be passed on for that field. So for the field gender, it will be either in this case M or F, depending on which one they choose.
So
And
it's
if
like-
if M is selected and they press on F, then M will be unselected and F will be selected, as opposed to a checkbox where each is independent.
It's like the quiz question.
Yeah,
Like,
if you
it's
did a
only one
multiple
answer.
choice quiz, you wanted to make it on, you were making it yourself using a form, yeah, you would do it with radio boxes. Yeah. As long as you're only allowed to have one answer for each question. Date and time fields, so we kind of saw that a minute ago. What do we got? We got the type is date, and when the user clicks on that, they're going to get a nice calendar come up from which they'll choose. The value will be put to the form field. Got other types that are similar to that. Time, as you can imagine, time will include hours and minutes, and date, time, local, similarly, week and month. Sorry, going too fast there. This one is a nice one, kind of one of my favorites, I suppose. I know because I think it's so useful. And you see this all the time, right? When they ask you, what country are you in, right? They typically are going to do a select, and they'll have a list of all the countries, and you can very quickly select which one you want. Now you can select more than one. I suppose with that country one, they would change that a little bit. Normally, you can select more than one with the same way you do otherwise with your control key or your shift key. So that's that. And this is what it looks like in HTML. So we've set the label to sit beside it, of course, and then we've got the selects tags. Inside that, we've got a bunch of options. The options will become a drop-down list. Sorry, yeah, okay. And that's what I just talked about. You could use control key to select more than one. If you wanted a shawarma and a burger, you press the control key and you get both. Okay, but we had to do the select with multiple to get that. Oh, sorry, my control. All right. The text area, that's going to allow the user to type a lot of stuff. All right, so we set that as a text area. When you're doing a text area, you can actually specify the size of the window that's going to be displayed on the screen. You can do that, or you can just sort of take it and they'll just input until it's sort of filled. So that's going to be a text area. Sorry. Okay, so the buttons we mentioned, you can have a submit button, and the submit button is an important one because that's the one that's going to cause the action to occur. Now, in the form tag, you put the action. That won't happen until you do the submit. Okay. Where we set the value to submit form. All right. Sorry about my, okay, so with a button, you can work with JavaScript. You can have you can be listening for a click. And so here, well, that's what's happening here. On click validate. What's happening is somewhere in our HTML, we've got some Java code in there, and we've got a Java code function called validate, which we've written. And when the person presses this button, it'll go ahead and run that code. Okay, so the next couple of slides, we're kind of near the end. I kind of went through this kind of quickly. What I'll do is I'll show you the example in a minute. But the next couple of slides are about validation. You would expect here that we'd have a whole lot of JavaScript, because that's what we're talking about, doing a bit of server-side validation. When the code gets to the server, there will be a validation there. If the input is not validated, it'll be refused. So we don't want that to happen, because we have a lot of network traffic, in connecting with the server and passing that data over and then it being refused. So we want to validate it before we send it there. So that's why we're going to use our JavaScript. But we also have some inbuilt HTML validation that works with the form. And so that's kind of neat. And I think that's what the next thing here is about. So we can put, for example, this required as an attribute for the input type. So we can say here required, and what will happen there is if the user doesn't input anything, then it'll fail to validate, and so it won't send it to the PHP. So we can do that. Some other things that we can set up an email type, and the email type, if there's no @ symbol in there, then it won't send it. It's not accepted. Number, we can set a min and max, and they won't be able to use anything outside that range. Okay, that's the end of those slides. So what I want to do is I'm going to close that, and let's have a look at what you're supposed to do. So you've got this survey that you'll see there's nothing there. All right, there's nothing there. So, but we want to make something there. Oh, so sorry, I was already in change size mode.
There's no video by.
Sorry, maybe I just got this morning.
The PDF.
Sorry?
There's only the PDF.
There's no video, sorry. So that's what this is your starting point, is this, okay? Can you see there's no form in there? But this is what you're supposed to make. So you got to take that and make this. So I think you can see that what you got to do is you've got to add these two. They're actually part of the same form, but the form has been styled so that we've got two different field sets. We use this term field set. This is one field set. This is another field set, and we put them into a grid beside each other. So we've got that all spaced out. So there's been a lot of work there done with CSS to set this up. And then the form is inside. The form is divided into two field sets, which are then set beside each other. Should I save this image for you? Is that what you're saying? Yeah, okay, at the end of the class, I'll get something there. I mean, I can do that. Yep. So that's what that looks like. So if you go to this is what you're given. This is what you're going to download, right? So if you go to the CSS there, you're going to have 3 CSS files. The styles file and the reset file, they're all done for you. Look at that. Dreamweaver. Yeah, okay. So there's the styles. And but the form CSS is empty. So what to do? So you need to style the form CSS. Let's just have a look at how that's done. So in the, I'm going to open this with Sublime Text. All right, so what you need to work on, all of this stuff is done for you, I think. I think you've got all your links there. Yeah, otherwise we wouldn't have been able to see that nice styling in the practice now. And so all of this is done for you. The body all the way down to, well, past that section. What you need to, the coding that you need to do in the HTML is the form coding. Okay. I don't think there's a form there, so you're going to have to do that. So let me just sort of explain what you're going to do. You've got an ID, which allows you to style it with CSS, right? So the ID is going to be, the form is going to be called survey, or you call it what you like. But you want to style the form, right? You need an action. You'll need this action unless you've got your own server, which you don't, right? So, well, you could have a server. I mean, any of you can install a server on your laptops. You know, you can just go and download a WAMP, or if you've got a Mac, you can download a MAMP, which will give you a PHP and an SQL server that you can sort of use on your computer. But you don't need to, because we've got a server. If you made your own server, then you have to make your own PHP. We haven't taught you PHP yet, so you can use the PHP that Hussam's created and put onto the server for you. You don't need to do anything with it. You just need to do this code. Now we need to do the post. Now you do need to do the post because in the PHP file that's sitting on the server, it's gonna have a post command in the PHP. So it's not gonna respond to your get command. So use the post. Okay, so we got two field sets. So you see this tag here. Now, why have we got two field sets? Because we've got two different parts of the form, right? So we got this part here. This is our first field set, and this is our second field set. So our first field set is called user information. You call it what you want, but it's basically going to be this stuff. If you're going to make that, you need to have a field set for that. If you're going to make this one, well, you're going to have another field set for that. So let's have a look at how you would do that field set. First field set goes from the start there to the end. It looks like a lot, but a lot of it's repeated. So it's not really that much work. What's happened is every one of these fields for the input has been given its own div. And that way we can make sure that each one takes another line, right? So we're separating them out. Otherwise, they'd all sort of collapse together and we'd have to style them out. It'd be a lot of work, too much trouble. So we give each one its own div. So that's why it looks like a lot of work inside the field set. Now we've got a legend at the top also. The legend is going to give us this thing here, the customer information. And you would see if you went and looked at the CSS, maybe I should try and open that CSS. Yeah, so over here. So where is that? So this stuff here, I hope that doesn't seem too strange. You know how to do a grid. So we're setting up a grid with two columns and some space between them. All that other stuff, I hope is not too tricky for you. So each form row is also split up, right? So repeating two columns and some space between them. The legend, this is what I was just talking about. So the legend is that red bit, and it's been given a background of a red and some padding to it. Can I make that a bit smaller? I'm afraid of that. Yeah. Which one of the, yeah, that's the one with the rounded edges, right? Or not, this one. Ha. Come on. I'm trying to reduce its size. There it is. Am I blind or, oh, okay. It didn't have an arrow, that's all. Sorry, my bad. All right, so we've got a legend. You're gonna have two of those legends and they can be styled the same because we're going to use just legend as our selector. And so there's another legend, so you can just style legend once. Then the divs that I mentioned. So you're gonna have a div for each row and we set it up as they're all in the same class, right? So that we only have to style them once. And so then we just got the things that we use for our input. Got a label for, which means that this name here is going to work with this name here. Okay, and it's going to have a placeholder which asks the person to put the name. Okay, so that's all in one div, the first one. So we just got one of those for each of those inputs, right? And then each of them has a label. These are all text. Text. And here we've got a telephone one. Okay, obviously, when we ask them the telephone, we actually use the type of telephone. And you'll see how that works when we open. And we got a type email that we use for the email. So far, not too tricky, I think, right? I think you can sort of do that. All of them the same class. Okay, and so what other types? We've got a checkbox type. Here, okay, here where we're doing the how many times to dine out, we're going to use a number. And this time we're going to do the slider, right? So we set, you wouldn't have to do all this, but you know, it makes it better. So it would actually work without this, but this just means that we're only accepting numbers between 0 and 10, and we let them slide up and down. And we're also starting out with the number 1, right? So it's going to have a default value of 1. Depending on your business rules, you might have set that up differently. You know what I mean? You might have done a market research and you found out that actually on average people dine out twice. And so you could have set the input to twice, right? So a lot of this will depend on how you're working with the business people. So I assume that you're going to become the IT people. You wouldn't do any of this until you talk to the business people about, you know, how this is going to be implemented. And so, as I said, so one, that's nice, but you know, that would always be as a result of your discussions with the business people in the, what would you call it, your analysis, business case analysis on that. All right, so anything else there that's sort of important to look at? Got a text area one. That's different as well. Got radio buttons here. So the radio buttons, only got 2, right? So the radio buttons here, the name is service, and you can have yes or no. And we got 2 buttons at the bottom that are put into a div by themselves, so they align up with each other. And so actually, when you go to style this, you'll see that you'll style each of these things separately, right? So you've got a submit type and you've got a reset type, and we've actually put some text in for them. And so the rest of the stuff is all given to you. I think the footer is that all you need to work on for HTML is there. And then you just need to look at your CSS and get that right for the form. Is that here? Yeah. So your CSS, let's have a quick look at what we're getting with our CSS. Okay, so as I said, we're doing a bit of a grid, setting it out in 2 columns. Grid template columns, that's the number of columns. Here is the number of columns that you get. All right, then you're going to have for your field set. So this is for the entire form, right? Then for the field set, what you're going to do there is you've got a color and a border, nothing fancy there. Now for the rows, so if we go back and look at our HTML, where is it here? So each of these is a form row. So each of these is going to be styled to work into that 2-column thing as well, so that they'll fit inside the little boxes that we made for them. So we need to style them specifically as well. So that's why we're doing the grid thing there. So they're also going to be your 2 columns. And we've got a gap between them there, 20 pixels. Okay, the legend I talked about. text area. We're just setting the size of it. Okay, got a height and width for the text column. And it's going to be 95% inside the little box that it's got, because it's actually styled inside that field set. So that's its parent. And yeah, that's it. So the buttons, there's 2 buttons. So from the first to the end, and we center them. Okay, so that would be kind of all you need to do. I don't know if I want to sort of just leave that up there and you do a copy. I mean, I'm just trying to show you what to do. I'm hoping that you can sort of figure that out without me leaving it there for you. But are there any sort of questions on that? You guys know what you need to do. Let's go back to the HTML, sorry, to the browser. Yeah, there it is. And let's have a look at that. So we see what we're going to make. I've got this, okay. Back in the browser, wrong one, survey. Back in the browser, so all of this was there. This is what you're adding. You see the 2 field sets, 2 columns. We got some space between them. And down the bottom, we've got this thing centered, which gives us our 2 buttons. That's what we're adding to it, just that. Now, how's it going to work? I can't spell my own name. Ormond Beach, yeah, okay. So when I type the number, oops, how did that go? What key did I press to get that?
No, the second, the left one, the last tab.
The last tab?
Yes.
Where?
The browser.
Oh yeah, there it is. This one?
Yes. You just go back.
Yeah, how did I get to that? That was weird. Oh, you know what? Probably I hit the submit key or something by mistake. Oh, well, when I entered it did that for me. Yeah, when I entered it, treated that as a submit. And so there's our slider. Okay, our checkbox, our date. Tomorrow, dine in or delivery, service friendly, and then I can type a bunch of stuff. And if I do a cancel, that'll empty that out. Or I could hit, and it takes me to this. Oh, I see. Yeah, it's giving me all the results, what I put in there. Sorry. You can tell that's the first time I did this with this survey, sorry. All right, so that's what you've got. I'll leave that up for you. Is that all right?
Yes.
That's what you're going to be trying to do. Okay. If I were you, I would work on the HTML first and do the styling afterwards, right? I mean, if you get the HTML right, you know, it'll be ugly because it won't be in a columns, right? Because that comes with the CSS. All right, well, that's up to you. I'll copy this and put it. I'll copy this and put it on D2L. This picture. Is that what you want?
They're available in the.
What do you want me to do?
Available.
It's available.
Yeah.
What's available? It's there. It's in the first 2 pages in the PDF. There you go. So let's look at the PDF, the first 2 pages here. Page 4 and 5. Yeah, there you go. 3 and 4. Yeah, so everything is there. What you need to do. Okay. Too much fun.
We put all of that inside the section. All of the HTML inside the section. I'll do have to exit.
I can't remember if the section is before or after. Let's look at the code again.
Yes.
Okay. So what am I doing here? So in the HTML, you're asking about the section. I think that the form is not in the, well, yes, the form is inside the section. Good question. In this one, yes, the form is inside the section. So let's see what that section does. Sorry, I didn't really look at that very hard. So the section includes all of this text about, yeah, so just put the form inside the section. Oh, so all that other stuff is there for you, right? But you need to do the form. Put it inside the section. That should be enough for you. So, I mean, you could start with 2 field sets and work inwards from that. 2 field sets. All right, you need to get, actually, the first thing you probably need to do is get that form tag working. This is quite important that you get this, or it's not going to work.
The link.
Sorry?
The link. The PHP link. You have to type it.
Sorry?
You have to type it like, if you have a shortcut, you can copy and paste.
I don't know. I would type it. But I'm not as so fast like you guys. You got maybe got a shortcut. Anybody got some idea of a shortcut how to get that? I don't know, man. You have to know what's on the server, right? That's not good. See what I did with mine. I bought this thing. It's got metal all around the outside, and then rubber on the inside. Which one? This one? What do you want?
That you want.
This is the form page.
Yeah, the final result.
This,
Yeah.
yeah, that's on the PDF. Oh, yeah. All right. So there it is.
Yeah.
Okay, so all of this stuff is going to be in that section. Right, that's your form. Your form's got 3 parts, right? It's got, this is field set there, and another one here. But this is just treated as 2 columns, right? You took a picture of it. So you need anything else? I'm gonna start.